This is part 10 of the Craftsman Emerson 150 drill press rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 9, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will be masking, priming, and painting parts. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Okay, here we are with the base, and I have not sanded that table surface on the base yet. We will do that after we've painted. And as with any paint job, preparation is key. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to mask off the bores for the column. So we'll start with that bottom one. Then we'll flip the base over and do the top bore for the column. And that top bore has a milled boss around it. So we're going to mask that as well, because we're going to sand it. You could paint the boss, but I think it looks better once it's been sanded, and that contrast with the paint around it. So obviously all this masking is kind of tedious. But this is a real simple item to mask off in comparison with the head. I mean, that thing is crazy, the amount of masking that needs to be done. So next we're going to mask off the table surface. And I like just outlining the table surface area and then masking off those cutouts that are on it so that paint doesn't bleed through when we paint the bottom side. And then I'm going to use some wax paper or baking paper, not sure what you want to call it, to mask off the major area of the table. Parchment paper maybe is what it's called. In any case, I like using it because the paint doesn't bleed through it. So here we are with the head, and we're going to mask it off. Now I'm just going to cut some of this masking tape so that it'll fit the bore that I'm going to mask. So I'm going to start with the two bores for the spindle pulley assembly. These are the bores that the two bearings on the spindle pulley assembly rest in. So that's the bottom one, and then the upper one. And there is a little bit of a boss on that upper one, but I'm going to paint that boss. I'm not worried about it. You won't see it. It'll be all the way at the top of the drill press head, plus you'll have a big pulley sitting over the top of it. So next we'll mask off that column bore, the top one. And then we're going to work on that support bore for the quill that sits pretty near the bottom. So on earlier heads, there's actually two of those inside the head casting, but in the later models, there's only one. Next, we've got the two head lock bores that are on the sides. Obviously, a lot of the areas here are kind of hard to get to. So you just got to kind of do what you can. For masking stuff like this, that X-Acto knife is indispensable. So here we are on the other side of that lock bore. After the lock bores are masked off, we're going to mask the two bores for the pinion. So there's one that's kind of deep in there, and then there's one right on the outside. And I know I mentioned it before, but When I've got two bores like this, there's usually kind of a raw area in between those two bores, and I want to make sure I get that area painted and primed, or primed and painted. So rather than just sticking a big piece of tape in there or putting plugs on it, I mask those bores. So next we've got the quill lock bores, and they are just like the headlock bores except smaller. And they're much harder to get to. It's a much tighter area there. Next we've got the bottom column bore. And then we'll have that last quill bore on the bottom. Next we've got the two bores for the motor mount pins. I'm just wrapping a piece of masking tape around a little wooden dowel to get them deep in there, and then trimming it. And we'll do that for both of those bores, and that will complete the head masking. So quite a bit of masking. And those are all the areas you don't want to get any paint on. So now I think we're ready to go ahead and prime these parts. For priming, I'm going to use this self-etching primer from Rust-Oleum. Cheapest place I've found it is Walmart over in the auto parts section. Now, my paint technique is controversial, I guess. I didn't learn to paint this way. It's just the way I do things. So I'm spraying all these hanging parts here, and I tend to just put one coat on kind of thick. And the way I learned to paint was several light coats. The problem with putting it on too thick is, one, it takes a while to dry, and two, you risk getting some drips. But that's how I shoot paint, so it is what it is. Here we are with the table, and I'm going to shoot the inside of the column bore first. And then we're painting the bottom side of this. And when you're painting stuff that you're going to have to paint in phases, I try to strategically plan that I'm going to paint the bottom side of all of these items first and then flip them. And if for whatever reason, when I flip them, the bottom side gets messed up because it's not completely cured or whatever, it's no big deal because it's the bottom side. So here we are with the base, and we're going to shoot it basically the same way we shot the table. Do the column bore first. And then the bottom side. So obviously there's a lot of supports in these two pieces, and you've got to get all the sides of those supports. And then that outer lip. And then we'll move it off to let it dry before we shoot the other side. So here we have the motor parts, the base and the two end frames. And again, we're going to shoot the inside of them first. I'm finding a little bit of debris on them from the lint from the towel that I used to towel dry them. And as you can tell, all these parts have a little light coat of surface rust from when we stripped them and derusted them. That's going to happen no matter what you do. when they dry off, they're going to have a little bit of that surface rust on them. But it's no big deal. The primer will take care of all that. And next we'll do the head casting. And I shoot the inside of it first, and I'm going to put that on pretty thick. I don't care if it drips and runs. Nobody's ever going to see it. And then we shoot the outside. So we'll set all these parts aside and let them cure. Right now, it's, well, on the day that I did this, it was in the 40s here in Georgia, so I'm going to have to let that sit for 24 hours rather than the half an hour to an hour that I normally allow for primer. So here we are on the next day, and we're back with the table, and we've now are shooting the top side of it. And then we'll move it, let it cure for another day before we are ready to apply paint to it. Here we are with the base, kind of the same. And here we are with the motor parts, and we're just going to flip them and shoot them. So sometimes the paint that, the spray paint, or if you get an automotive paint or whatever, a lot of times nowadays they make paints that are paint and primer as well. But I would still prime these parts. The primer is the binder that ensures the paint will adhere to the surface. So here we are with the head casting, and we're doing the underside of it and getting some of those areas on the inside that we couldn't get to the way we had it oriented when we first started priming it. And we'll just make sure that that outside has a good coating of primer that's even. So this is the paint I'm going to use to paint everything. This is a Champagne Mist Metallic 261415 from Rust-Oleum. And this is an example of a paint that is a paint and a primer in one, but I still primed all these parts. So we'll shoot all the hanging parts first. And this naturally is 24 hours after we finished priming. So this Champagne Mist is the closest color match you can get to the original Power Bronze that these drill presses were produced in 3 different color. King Sealy used a kind of a lighter battleship gray initially, and then sometime around the anniversary date they switched to a Power Bronze, and I think the Power Bronze and the gray kind of ran concurrently. And then as we transition over to Emerson, they used a very dark gray, almost a charcoal gray. And since this is an Emerson 150, it was originally this dark charcoal gray. But you got to admit, that champagne bronze is a great looking color. So just like we shot the primer, we're shooting all these parts bottom side first. And we will let them cure for 24 hours, and then we will come back and shoot the top side. So we shot the table. This is the base. And this can, for whatever reason, was leaking at the trigger, so I have to keep wrapping a paper towel around it. Keep it from dripping. It's the first one of these cans like this that I've had do that. But a lot of people have said they don't like these. They prefer the original, the old school spray paint can nozzle as opposed to this thing. Here we are with the motor parts. Get the paper towel. So to do all this stuff, it took me about 3.5 cans for everything. So 3.5 cans of primer and then 3.5 cans of paint. So if you're going to do yours, I would recommend you just go ahead and buy 5 cans, and that way you've got enough in case you make some mistakes and have to strip it off and redo it or something. Plus, it's good. You can always touch up something that gets scratched or nicked later on. Here we are with the head casting. And just like with the primer, I'm going to shoot that paint really thick on the inside so that we get every nook and cranny. And now we're back to a new can that is not leaking, so no more paper towel. So the one problem I have with one of the nozzles on these cans is that it comes out in a fan as opposed to a more directed pattern. And that means that when you're trying to get something that's really small, you end up getting a lot of overspray. But yeah, no big deal. So here we are with the table, and we waited 24 hours before we did this. We're doing the top side now. And this is the coat that's going to matter the most. So I'm taking the most amount of time and the most caution when I paint the top side of all of these items. And this is the base. So if you have to shoot an area that you need to make sure you get some paint in there, like those indentions where the bolt down points are for the base, shoot those first and then come back and you can even out that spray. And here we are with the motor parts. I suppose for some people there's a point at which you're going to start rushing through this, and don't do it. I mean, you spend all that time masking and prepping and cleaning. Take your time, get all this done correctly. And here we are with the head for its final paint. Just making sure we got everything on the inside. And then we'll shoot the outside again. So I'm going to let these parts sit for probably a day, and then I'm going to remove the masking on any of them that are not going to get a second coat of paint. And then we'll let all of this stuff sit for probably a week before we touch it again. And that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. If you got any questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below. And as always, I appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.